At a family dinner to welcome my grandson, my daughter-in-law stood up. She accused me of controlling the family and clinging to money. My own son said nothing, but as her cruel words hung in the air, I simply smiled, picking up the microphone. Tonight, everyone would hear the real truth about the inheritance. You won't believe what happened next. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. 2 days. Eleanor had spent 2 days meticulously preparing for this dinner, the aroma of roasted herbs and simmering sauces a comforting embrace throughout her home. Every detail, from the crisp white linen on the dining table to the carefully arranged wildflowers in the centerpiece, whispered of love and anticipation. Her beautiful home, a sanctuary of cherished memories, felt alive tonight, particularly with the quiet hum of Arthur's presence. It had been 5 years since he passed, leaving a void that time had softened but never truly filled. Tonight, however, felt different. Tonight, her grandson Liam, just 6 months old, would grace these walls with his tiny, precious presence, filling them with the promise of a future Arthur had so eagerly anticipated. Eleanor knew Arthur would have loved seeing his grandson here, his eyes twinkling with pride. The doorbell chimed, a familiar melody that sent a jolt of nervous excitement through Eleanor. She smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and walked to the door, her heart light. Michael, her son, stood there, a proud, tired smile on his face, holding a car seat. Beside him was Scarlett, her daughter-in-law, impeccably dressed, but with a cool reserve that always seemed to follow her like a shadow. "Michael, Scarlett, welcome," Eleanor exclaimed, her voice brimming with genuine warmth. Come in, come in. Let me see my grandson." As Eleanor reached out, a gentle longing in her eyes, Scarlett subtly shifted the car seat. "Oh, he just fell asleep, Eleanor," she said, her tone polite but firm. "It was quite a long drive. We wouldn't want to wake him, would we?" The words, though seemingly innocuous, were a sharp exclusion, a deliberate barrier. Eleanor's hand fell, a small ache blooming in her chest. She simply nodded, masking her disappointment, and stepped aside to let them in. She longed to cradle Liam, to feel his soft weight in her arms, but Scarlett had made it clear that moment was not hers. Soon the other guests arrived. Her brother George, a man whose boisterous laughter could always fill a room, entered with his wife, Helen, their arms laden with a small gift for Liam. Their presence was a comfort, a reminder of the unwavering bonds of family, the kind that Scarlett seemed to resist. The house, once quiet save for Eleanor's preparations, now buzzed with the gentle chatter and warmth of reunion. Dinner began, a seemingly pleasant affair. The conversation revolved mostly around baby Liam, his latest milestones, and the adventures of new parenthood for Michael and Scarlett. Eleanor listened, contributing where she could, always ensuring everyone's wine glasses were filled and plates were ample. She watched Michael, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and a faint, unspoken worry. He seemed happy, content in his new role, yet a part of Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that he was often navigating a path meticulously laid out by Scarlett. Midway through the meal, George raised his glass, his voice clear and resonant. "To Liam, the newest member of our wonderful family," he announced, a wide smile on his face. "And to Eleanor," he continued, turning his gaze to her, "for this magnificent dinner and for always being the heart of our family. Cheers." A chorus of cheers echoed around the table, a wave of warmth washing over Eleanor. She caught Scarlett's eye across the table. In that fleeting moment, she saw the pleasant facade crack. Scarlett's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly, and a visible sourness settled upon her features. The appreciation for Eleanor, it seemed, was not a welcome sentiment. Then, without warning, Scarlett pushed back her chair. The scrape of wood on the polished floor momentarily silenced the room. She stood, glass in hand, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed directly on Eleanor. Her voice, though low, carried a chilling clarity. "Since we're all being so sentimental," Scarlett began, her eyes glinting, "I propose a toast. To Eleanor," she paused, letting the name hang in the air, "the matriarch who tries to control every aspect of this family's life and cling to every cent of the family money." The words landed like a physical blow, stripping the warmth from the room. A shocked silence descended, thick and suffocating. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face, her breath catching in her throat. Stunned, she looked around, searching for a reaction, an outcry, Anything. George and Helen exchanged horrified glances, but it was Michael she looked for most. Her son, her only child. His face was a mask of discomfort, his gaze fixed on his plate, silent. His quietude, his absolute failure to defend her, cut deeper than Scarlett's venomous words ever could. It was the confirmation of a truth Eleanor had long feared. Scarlett had truly claimed Michael. In that agonizing silence, a quiet resolve settled within Eleanor. Years of subtle manipulations, of watching Scarlett slowly, meticulously, drive a wedge between her and Michael, of veiled insults and dismissive gestures, coalesced into a singular, undeniable truth. This was not just a rude remark, this was an open declaration of war, an attempt to publicly diminish and dismiss her entirely. But no more. Not tonight. Not when Arthur's legacy was so intrinsically linked to the very family money Scarlett had just so carelessly maligned. Eleanor rose, her movement slow, deliberate. Her hands, though trembling slightly, reached for the small, ornate microphone Arthur had bought for family karaoke nights, now resting innocently on a side table. Her voice, when it came, was steady, a surprising strength underlying its calm tone. "Since we're being honest," she began, her eyes sweeping over the hushed faces, finally settling on Scarlett's smirk, "I think it's time everyone knew the truth about the inheritance." A ripple went through the room. Michael finally looked up, confusion etched on his face. Eleanor continued, her voice gaining a quiet power. "Arthur, my late husband, was a meticulous man. He loved this family, and he loved Michael and Liam more than anything. He established a trust fund specifically for Michael's future stability and Liam's education. He wanted it to ensure that their paths were clear, unburdened by financial worries. It was a gift for their future, not a bottomless pit for designer purses or a luxury car, as some might assume." Her gaze lingered pointedly on Scarlett. Scarlett's smugness faltered, her perfectly composed face paling as Eleanor's words sunk in. Michael's confusion deepened, a frown knitting his brow. "Mom, what are you talking about?" he interjected, his voice laced with bewilderment. Eleanor turned to her son, her expression softening slightly before hardening again as she looked back at Scarlett. "I'm talking about the trust Arthur set up," she stated clearly. "A trust with very specific conditions. Conditions, Michael, that Scarlett has been trying to bypass and exploit since your wedding day. I'm talking about the hidden credit card bills, Michael. The ones I've been quietly paying off for years to protect your credit score. The ones that went far beyond what our family's finances could sustainably support." The sound of shattering glass suddenly pierced the air. Scarlett's wine glass, clutched too tightly in her hand, had cracked and then fragmented, splinters falling onto the polished tabletop. Her eyes, wide with a sudden dawning terror, darted between Eleanor and Michael. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained for years, the mask of demure elegance, was beginning to crack, revealing the raw fear beneath. A deep breath escaped Eleanor's lips, a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying finally lifting. This wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. It was about honoring Arthur's memory, and more importantly, protecting Michael from the very person he had chosen to share his life with. It was what Arthur would have wanted. The shattered glass lay on the polished oak, a stark symbol of the fractured peace. George and Helen, after a strained exchange of hushed goodbyes, quickly departed, leaving Eleanor alone with Michael and Scarlett in the echoing silence of her dining room. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and simmering rage. Scarlett, her face now a mask of raw fury, finally broke the quiet. "You miserable old witch!" she shrieked, her voice sharp and venomous, completely abandoning her earlier pretense. "You've hated me from day one, haven't you? Always plotting, always watching, just waiting for the moment to ruin my life." Eleanor remained calm, her gaze steady and unwavering. "No, Scarlett," she responded, her voice a quiet counterpoint to Scarlett's hysteria. "I never hated you. My concern grew, yes, but it wasn't about hate. It was about Michael. The man who used to call me every Sunday, who visited twice a month, suddenly became distant after your wedding. His calls grew fewer, his visits stopped, and when we did speak, his conversations were guarded, edited. He was no longer entirely himself, and that, Scarlett, is what troubled me." She recounted an incident, a vivid memory that had been the first true red flag. Do you remember, Michael, Eleanor began, turning slightly to her son, about 6 months after your wedding? You called, out of the blue, saying you had to leave immediately. You said Scarlett was upset because I had supposedly questioned your spending on the new living room furniture. You claimed I'd called you just that morning, demanding to know where all your money was going. Eleanor paused, letting the memory hang in the air. But I never made that call, Michael. Not that day, not any day. I was happy for you, for your new home. I was confused then, but now I understand. Eleanor continued, her voice gaining a quiet resolve. That was just the beginning of a pattern, Michael. Little lies, subtle shifts. Do you remember when you were renovating the kitchen? Scarlett told you I'd called it wasteful, that I thought you were throwing money away. Again, a conversation that never happened. Or when Arthur's death anniversary came around and I asked you to visit? Suddenly, there was always some urgent, unavoidable emergency that kept you from coming. Scarlett would tell me about Liam having a fever or a sudden, unexpected work crisis for you. But later, Michael, you'd mention having had a quiet day at home. These fabrications, seemingly insignificant on their own, had formed a silent, insidious web around them. Each small distortion, each carefully placed falsehood, slowly transformed Eleanor from a loving, supportive mother into a controlling manipulator in Michael's eyes. She had felt his distance, his growing wariness, and her heart had ached with the injustice, knowing she was being painted as something she wasn't, all while trying to decipher the true cause of his withdrawal. It was a slow, painful erosion of their bond, engineered by Scarlett's clever deceptions. Now it was time for the irrefutable truth. Eleanor reached under the dining table, retrieving a stack of meticulously organized envelopes. She placed them before Michael, whose expression had morphed from confusion to a dawning horror. These, Michael, she said, her voice soft but firm, are copies of your financial statements. Statements from credit cards you never knew existed, opened in your name, accumulating over $30,000 in debt over the past 3 years. Michael stared at the envelopes, his hands trembling as he reached for them. His fingers fumbled with the flaps, pulling out crisp, official-looking documents. As he flipped through them, his eyes scanning the alarming figures, a wave of disbelief washed over his face. He looked up at Scarlett, his expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. Scarlett, seeing her carefully constructed world crumbling, reacted instantly. "It's not my fault!" she shrieked, pointing a furious finger at Eleanor. "She's been tracking everything, Michael. She's obsessed with our finances, with controlling everything. She probably even planted those to frame me." But Michael wasn't listening to Scarlett. His gaze was fixed on the statements, his face paling with each passing page. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him ashen. Scarlett, sensing her usual deflection wasn't working, quickly shifted tactics. Her voice softened, morphing into a sorrowful whisper. Tears, seemingly appearing from nowhere, welled in her eyes and traced paths down her cheeks. "Michael," she whimpered, her voice quivering, "I was going to tell you. I really was. It's just, I didn't want to stress you out. With the baby and everything, I just wanted to handle it myself. For us. I got into a little trouble, but I was going to fix it." Her words were laced with feigned vulnerability, a desperate plea for sympathy. Eleanor, however, had seen this act too many times. "Don't, Scarlett," she said, her tone cutting through the false sincerity. "Don't insult his intelligence or mine. This isn't just about debt, Michael. It's about the lying, the manipulation. The debt is a symptom, not the disease. The disease is the web of deceit you've woven around my son. Do you remember when she told you I said your new job wasn't good enough? Or when she fabricated an illness to stop you from coming to my birthday? Those were not attempts to protect you from stress, Michael. Those were attempts to isolate you, to control your narrative, and to turn you against me." Michael, still clutching the financial statements, looked from Scarlett's tearful face to Eleanor's resolute one. The weight of the revelations, the undeniable evidence in his hands, was crushing. His voice was raw, tinged with a dawning anger and profound disappointment. "Mom," he demanded, his eyes wide and searching, "what else haven't you told me?" Eleanor looked at her son, then her gaze softened as it fell upon the car seat nearby, where baby Liam still slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm raging around him. Michael, still holding the statements, gently reached out and rested a hand on the car seat. In that moment, Eleanor realized the fragile nature of her family. This was not a quick reveal. It was the beginning of a long, painful process. She couldn't overwhelm Michael, not with Liam so close. She had to proceed with caution, for the sake of her grandson, for the fractured pieces of her family. Michael, Eleanor said, her voice softer. We have much to discuss, much more than can be said tonight. But you need time to process this. These initial revelations are enough for now. Michael said nothing more. His face was a canvas of unreadable emotions as he carefully picked up Liam's car seat. He then helped Scarlett, who still looked utterly stunned and defeated, gather her purse. Without another word, he led Scarlett and Liam out of the house, the door clicking shut behind them, leaving Eleanor in the sudden, oppressive quiet. Eleanor stood there for a long time, the silence ringing in her ears. The scent of her meticulously prepared dinner now felt stale, heavy with the weight of shattered trust. Doubt, a cruel companion, crept into her thoughts. Had she done the right thing? Had exposing Scarlett so publicly, so abruptly, been the correct choice? She spent sleepless nights haunted by these questions, staring at the ceiling, wondering about Michael, about Liam. She knew with a chilling certainty that this was just the beginning of a painful chapter for their family, a chapter she was now compelled to write, no matter the cost. 4 days later, the doorbell chimed, a hesitant, almost timid sound that pulled Eleanor from her reverie. She had spent the intervening days in a quiet torment, replaying every moment of the dinner, every word exchanged. The house, usually a comfort, now felt heavy with the lingering echo of confrontation. When she opened the door, Michael stood there, alone, looking utterly exhausted. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes shadowed, and the cheerful spark she remembered from his youth seemed to have been extinguished. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, who had been wrestling with a profound internal battle. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. "Can I come in?" Eleanor stepped aside, her heart aching for him. He walked into the living room, a space filled with memories of laughter and shared moments, now feeling strangely desolate. Michael sank onto the sofa, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's worse than you thought, Mom," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "After I left that night, I went through everything. Every statement, every document. I found more credit cards. Ones I never knew existed opened in my name. The debt, it's not $30,000, it's almost $50,000. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a raw agony. "How did I not see it, Mom? How could I have been so blind?" Eleanor sat beside him, gently placing a hand on his arm. "Scarlett is good, Michael," she said, her voice soft but firm. "She's incredibly skilled at deception. She preyed on your trust, your desire for a happy home. Every time I tried to mention anything, no matter how subtly, she would twist it, convince you I was jealous, that I couldn't stand to see you happy. She made you believe I was interfering when all I ever wanted was to protect you." Eleanor's words were a balm, an explanation that finally made sense of the years of subtle erosion of their relationship. Then, Michael pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed it open and handed it to Eleanor. It was a real estate listing. A listing for her home. Her home, the house Arthur had built for them, the sanctuary of her life, filled with every cherished memory. And scrawled in the margins, in Scarlett's distinctive cursive, were notes about potential selling prices, market values, and even a speculative timeline. Eleanor felt a cold dread creep through her. She looked at Michael, speechless, as a horrifying realization dawned. Scarlett hadn't just been after his money. She had been planning to convince Eleanor to sell her home, undoubtedly under the guise of it being for Liam's future or downsizing for convenience. "That's not all," Michael said, his voice barely audible, his eyes fixed on some distant point. He pulled out his phone, navigating to a messaging app. He showed her a series of text messages sent between Scarlett and an unknown contact. The content chilled Eleanor to the bone. They were discussions, detailed and explicit, about selling the lakeside Tahoe property, a cherished family retreat that was not only dear to their hearts but also a significant part of Arthur's carefully constructed trust. That property was meant to be a legacy, a place for generations to gather held securely within the trust's rigid framework. A wave of vindication, cold and hard, washed over Eleanor. Arthur, dear Arthur, he had known. He had sensed Scarlett's true nature, her grasping ambition. He had seen past her charm long before Eleanor herself had fully understood. That was why he had set up the trust so rigidly, with so many stipulations, so many protective clauses. He had anticipated this, had tried to shield their family, his son, and his future grandson from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. Eleanor had always trusted Arthur's judgment implicitly, and now, even in death, his foresight was proving to be their salvation. Michael took a deep, shaky breath, his gaze still fixed on the phone in his hand. "And then," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I found this." He pulled another document from his pocket, a draft letter, a letter to a lawyer. Eleanor read the first few lines, and her breath hitched. It was a request to initiate proceedings to declare her, Eleanor, incompetent, to gain power of attorney, to seize control of everything she and Arthur had built, every asset, every decision. Not just the money, not just the properties, but her very autonomy. Eleanor was shattered. The cold dread turned into a chilling horror. This wasn't just about greed. It was about absolute control, about erasing her presence entirely. Scarlett hadn't just wanted to live a lavish life. She wanted to rewrite their family's story, to remove Eleanor from the narrative and take everything that was theirs. Tears welled in Michael's eyes, finally spilling over and trailing down his face. "Mom," he choked out, "I am so, so sorry for believing her, for letting her drive a wedge between us, for not seeing what she was doing, what she was truly capable of." His shoulders shook with silent sobs, the weight of his betrayal and Scarlett's deception finally crushing him. Eleanor pulled him into a tight embrace, holding her son as she hadn't been able to in years. She stroked his hair, tears stinging her own eyes. "Michael, my love," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You acted out of love. You trusted the woman you married. You were doing what you thought was right for your family. That's not something to apologize for. You're here now. That's what matters. You see the truth, and that's all I ever wanted." She hugged him tighter, the years of unspoken pain and distance momentarily melting away in the warmth of their reunion. As they sat there, two souls slowly healing, the sharp, unmistakable sound of a car door slamming shut outside ripped through the quiet. Eleanor's eyes widened. Scarlett! She had followed Michael. A moment later, frantic pounding rattled the front door, echoing through the house like a drumbeat of impending doom. "Michael, open this door right now!" Scarlett's voice, shrill and furious, screamed from the other side. Michael stiffened in Eleanor's arms. He pulled back, his face streaked with tears but now set with a newfound resolve. He squared his shoulders, a glint of determination entering his shadowed eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice firm, "for everything, but I promise you it ends today." He stood up, walked purposefully to the door, and with a deep breath, turned the lock. The door swung inward with a force, and Scarlett burst into the living room, her face contorted with rage, her hair disheveled. In her arms, clutched tightly, was baby Liam, awake now, his tiny face confused by the sudden commotion. The final confrontation had begun. Scarlett burst into the living room, a whirlwind of fury and desperation. Baby Liam, nestled uncomfortably in her arms, let out a startled cry, his tiny face contorted in a bewildered frown. Scarlett clutched him tighter, as if using him as a shield, her eyes, red-rimmed and blazing, locked onto Michael. "How could you, Michael?" she shrieked, her voice high-pitched and raw. "Conspiring with her, behind my back. You're letting this miserable old witch poison your mind." Michael, though visibly shaken, stood his ground. The shift in him was palpable. The bewildered husband was gone, replaced by a man slowly grasping the enormity of his wife's betrayal. "Scarlett," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, "this isn't about Mom. This is about the $50,000 in debt you racked up in my name. This is about the lies you told, the way you manipulated me, the way you tried to isolate me from my own mother. This is about you planning to sell Mom's house and the Tahoe property behind our backs." Scarlett's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she quickly regained her composure, resorting to her familiar tactic of deflection. "You invaded my privacy, Michael," she retorted, her voice trembling with manufactured indignation. "You went through my things, my personal files. How dare you? What kind of husband does that?" "Our finances are not your things, Scarlett," Michael countered, his voice rising, a hint of steel in his tone. "They're our finances, our future, or at least I thought they were. But you've been systematically destroying our future and trying to steal my mother's, all for your own selfish gain." Eleanor watched the scene unfold, her heart aching for her son. The pain of discovering Scarlett's true nature, of realizing how deeply he had been deceived, was etched on his face. It was a cruel awakening, but a necessary one. Scarlett's carefully constructed facade crumbled again. The anger melted into a fresh wave of tears, her voice adopting a wounded, almost tragic tone. "I was trying to secure our future, Michael," she wailed, burying her face in Liam's hair, though he was too young to understand. "You don't understand the pressure. Your mother, with all her money, just hoarding it, never offering to help us. She hated me, Michael, because I came from nothing. This is all your fault, Eleanor. You've always hated me, always tried to undermine me." Her venomous gaze snapped back to Eleanor, filled with a furious, desperate accusation. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, the doorbell chimed again, a polite but insistent interruption. All three heads swiveled toward the door. Who could it be now? Eleanor, still in a state of shock from Scarlett's tirade, walked slowly to the door and opened it. Standing on her porch was a woman, strikingly similar to Scarlett. The same sharp features, the same intense eyes, though her expression was one of quiet concern rather than rage. "Hello, Eleanor," the woman said, her voice calm and clear. "My name is Charlotte. I'm Scarlett's sister." Michael gasped, completely stunned. Scarlett froze, her face draining of all color, her tears instantly drying. "Charlotte, what are you doing here?" she shrieked, her voice laced with a raw fear Eleanor had never heard from her before. Charlotte ignored her sister, her gaze fixed on Michael and Eleanor. "I came because I couldn't let her do this to another family," she stated, her voice unwavering. "Another family?" Michael echoed, his voice barely a whisper, a new wave of sickening dread washing over him. "What are you talking about?" Charlotte sighed, a deep, sorrowful sound. "Yama." "Scarlett was married before, Michael, to a man named Robert. She did exactly this to him. She manipulated him, slowly isolated him from his family, and systematically drained him financially. By the time his parents and siblings realized what was happening, Robert had lost everything. His family had to disown him just to protect themselves from her debts and schemes. They've had a restraining order against her for years." Scarlett erupted, a frantic, desperate scream tearing from her throat. "It's a lie, all lies. Robert was abusive. He was the one who was draining me. Charlotte, you always hated me. You always sided with him." "Stop it, Scarlett," Charlotte said, her voice firm and devoid of emotion. "You know that's not true. Robert was a kind man, if a bit naive. He loved you and you took advantage of that love, just like you've done with Michael." Charlotte then reached into her purse and pulled out a slim folder. She walked past the now paralyzed Scarlett and handed the folder to Michael. "Here," she said. "This contains her marriage certificate to Robert, their divorce papers, and the restraining order from Robert's family. I also have a copy of a police report Robert filed about financial coercion, though it didn't go anywhere because he was too afraid of you." Michael's hands shook as he took the folder, his eyes wide with disbelief. He glanced at Scarlett, whose face was now a mask of utter terror. "I've been tracking her for years, Michael," Charlotte explained, her eyes meeting Eleanor's. "Ever since I saw what she did to Robert and his family, I've lived with the guilt. I swore I'd never let her destroy another innocent life. When Eleanor's story about the dinner started circulating on social media after her initial video, and I saw Scarlett's face, I knew. I knew she had found another victim. I reached out to Eleanor immediately, connecting with her after her initial public revelation." Scarlett, now cornered, devoid of any plausible defense, collapsed into a desperate, sobbing heap, still clutching baby Liam. "You're all trying to ruin my life," she wailed, tears streaming down her face. "You're trying to take my son away from me. You want to destroy everything I have." Michael, despite the maelstrom of emotions swirling within him, the betrayal, the shock, the dawning understanding, looked at Scarlett with a strange mixture of pity and resolve. He walked over to her, reaching out a hand, though he didn't touch her. "No, Scarlett," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "No one wants to take Liam from you. He's our son. But this isn't about ruining your life. This is about accountability. This is about the truth. And it's about protecting our son from the consequences of your actions." The air was thick with the weight of Charlotte's revelations. The truth about Scarlett's past unraveling like a cheap sweater. If you're still with me, I hope you're ready for what happens next. It's a breaking point you won't believe. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of my story. Charlotte stepped forward, her gaze softening as she looked at her sister. "Scarlett," she said gently, "you need help. Real help. This destructive pattern, this need to constantly deceive and manipulate, it's not normal. It's hurting everyone, especially you." For a fleeting moment, Eleanor saw something flicker in Scarlett's eyes. Genuine fear, perhaps even a sliver of remorse. It was quickly extinguished, replaced by a cold, calculating emptiness that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. Then, in a chillingly calm voice, Scarlett spoke, her earlier theatrical tears completely gone. "Yes," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I married Robert for his money. And yes, I've been trying to get control of the inheritance, of Michael's future, of Eleanor's house, of everything." Her confession hung in the air, stark and brutal. Then she began to justify it. "You don't understand," Scarlett continued, her gaze sweeping over them all, settling briefly on Michael. "You've never known what it's like. I grew up with nothing, absolutely nothing. Watching everyone else, like all of you, have everything handed to them, silver spoons in your mouths, while I had to scrape and fight for every single crumb." Michael stared at her, utterly bewildered. "What are you talking about, Scarlett?" he asked, his voice raw with confusion. "You told me your father was a surgeon, that your family was well off, that you went to private schools. You said your parents had invested in a medical startup and lost everything, which was why you were so careful with money." Charlotte, standing quietly by, offered a knowing smile. "Our father," she corrected gently, "was a janitor. Our mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. We grew up in a small apartment, Michael. We were taught the value of hard work and, most importantly, honesty. Scarlett, she just chose a different path." The full extent of Scarlett's fabrications, her entire constructed identity, crashed down on Michael. Not only had she lied about her actions, but about her very past, her background, the foundation of who she claimed to be. Just then, baby Liam, who had been quietly observing the adults with wide, innocent eyes, began to cry in earnest. His small face crumpled, sensing the overwhelming tension, the emotional maelstrom in the room. His cries were a piercing sound, a desperate plea for peace and comfort amidst the chaos. Michael, seeing his son's distress, immediately reached out. "Here," he said, his voice soft, "give him to me." To everyone's surprise, Scarlett, whose shoulders now seemed to sag in utter defeat, handed Liam over without protest. Her grip was slack, her resistance gone. She watched, her face emotionless, as Michael carefully cradled their son, gently shushing him. Eleanor walked over to Charlotte, a quiet appreciation in her eyes. "Thank you, Charlotte," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Charlotte shook her head, a deep regret etched on her face. "I wish I could have found her sooner, Eleanor. I truly do. This shouldn't have happened." Michael, holding Liam close, his son's warmth a grounding presence, looked from Eleanor to Charlotte, then finally back to Scarlett. His voice was heavy, filled with a profound weariness. "What happens now?" he asked. Not to Scarlett, but to the room, to the fractured remnants of his life. Scarlett, sensing a shift, perhaps a sliver of opportunity, tried to reassert control, to salvage what little authority she had left. We go home, Michael, she said, her voice regaining a touch of its former imperiousness. We deal with this privately, as a family, without all this interference with ours. Her gaze swept dismissively over Eleanor and Charlotte, but Michael shook his head, a firm, resolute gesture. No, Scarlett, he stated, his voice devoid of anger, but filled with an unwavering conviction. We are beyond that. We are beyond privately dealing with it. The losses, the $50,000 of debt, the plans to sell Mom's house, the trust, the attempt to declare Mom incompetent, none of that can just be swept away. Not anymore, Bo. Scarlett's eyes narrowed, a desperate fire igniting within them. But I love you, Michael, she declared, her voice rising in a final desperate plea. I love you and Liam. We're a family. Michael looked at her, his expression unreadable. Do you, Scarlett? He asked, his voice quiet, almost mournful. Or do you love what I represent? The security, the inheritance, the lifestyle you thought you could build from it? Scarlett flinched, the question striking home. She had no answer. Her carefully constructed world had finally imploded. With a tight, defiant set to her jaw, she shook her head. I'm not discussing this further, she announced, her voice cold. I'm going home. I expect you and Liam back by noon tomorrow, Michael. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the house, the front door slamming shut behind her with a resounding thud that echoed through the sudden silence. Michael watched her go, a long sigh escaping his lips. He looked down at Liam, who had finally quieted in his arms, his tiny head nestled against his chest. He looked at Eleanor, then at Charlotte, a silent message passing between them. I'm staying here tonight, Mom, he said, his voice firm and clear. With Liam. We're staying here with you. 6 months had passed since that tumultuous night, 6 months that felt like a lifetime, yet had flown by in a blur of change and healing. Eleanor sat on her garden bench, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves of her rose bushes, a faint scent of summer in the air. She watched Michael, a broad, genuine smile on his face, pushing Liam on the infant swing that now hung from the sturdy branch of an old oak tree. Liam, now a plump and giggling 10-month-old, let out joyful babbles, his small legs kicking with delight. The scene was one of profound peace, a tableau she never thought she would witness again. The day after the confrontation had been a whirlwind. Michael, accompanied by Eleanor and Charlotte, had gone back to the house he shared with Scarlett. They found it eerily quiet. Scarlett was gone. On the kitchen counter, a hastily scribbled note lay weighted by a ceramic coaster. You chose them over me. You'll regret this. A quick check of their joint account confirmed their fears. It had been cleared out. The ensuing weeks were brutal. Scarlett, ever the manipulator, had not gone quietly into the night. She surfaced, filing for full custody of Liam, weaving a fantastical web of lies about Michael's supposed incompetence as a father, his neglect, and even his financial irresponsibility. Eleanor and Michael braced themselves for a prolonged, messy battle. But Scarlett's case, built on a foundation of falsehoods, quickly crumbled under scrutiny. Charlotte's calm, articulate testimony, backed by irrefutable financial evidence of Scarlett's debt and her blatant attempts to sell Eleanor's property and declare her incompetent, painted a devastatingly clear picture. The revelation of Scarlett's hidden first marriage and the restraining order from Robert's family sealed her fate. Her lawyer, realizing the futility and likely ethical implications, withdrew from the case. 3 months into the custody battle, Scarlett simply vanished. A week later, a postcard arrived from Phoenix, bearing a brief, almost dismissive apology. Sorry, just couldn't do it. That was the last they heard from her. Michael was granted full custody of Liam. Scarlett's parental rights remained intact but dormant, a legal limbo that brought a strange sense of relief. It meant Liam was safe, and the drama was for now over. Liam, now thriving, was the undisputed light of Eleanor's life. He babbled Dada with surprising clarity, and his enthusiastic Nana melted her heart every single time. He was a constant source of joy, a living testament to the resilience of love. Michael and Liam had moved into Eleanor's home. What was initially conceived as a temporary arrangement had, in the comfort and routine of shared life, evolved into something that felt wonderfully permanent. The house, once quiet with Arthur's memory, now buzzed with the joyful sounds of a baby's laughter and a son's rediscovered presence. Charlotte had become a regular fixture, a welcome and calming presence. She visited often, always bringing a sense of quiet understanding. Their conversations about Scarlett were never tinged with bitterness, only a shared, weary acceptance. She runs when she can't control the situation, Charlotte had explained one afternoon, sipping tea in the very living room where Scarlett's lies had been exposed. It's always been her pattern. When the pressure gets too much or her schemes are discovered, she just disappears and reinvents herself somewhere new. Michael was healing. Slowly but surely, the shadows of betrayal were lifting. He was attending therapy, working through the complex emotions of anger, grief, and the profound disappointment of being deceived by someone he had loved. He had reconnected with old friends, rediscovered his passions, and even, cautiously, started dating a kind, gentle kindergarten teacher he'd met through a mutual acquaintance. Eleanor observed this new confident Michael with immense pride, knowing he was finally finding his own path. Charlotte arrived for their weekly family lunch, stepping into the garden. She smiled, joining Eleanor on the bench, and watched Michael effortlessly lift Liam into his arms. "The garden looks beautiful, Eleanor," Charlotte remarked, her gaze sweeping over the vibrant blooms. "So peaceful." "It is," Eleanor agreed, her eyes fixed on her son and grandson. She then turned to Charlotte, a question lingering. "Any word?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Charlotte shook her head gently. "No, I don't think we'll hear from her for a very long time, if ever." Eleanor hummed softly. She wondered if Scarlett would ever truly change, if she would ever confront her own demons. She acknowledged Scarlett's capacity for reinvention, a talent that was both terrifying and, in a strange way, almost impressive. But that was Scarlett's journey, not theirs. Soon George and Helen would arrive for lunch, bringing with them their usual warmth and boisterous laughter. Eleanor watched Michael tickle Liam, the baby's infectious giggles filling the air. She thought of Arthur, of his wisdom, of the deep love that had compelled him to protect his family and their legacy so carefully. He had always known. Eleanor found a profound peace in the truth that had emerged from the ashes of betrayal, in the unexpected allies who had appeared, and in the renewed strength of her family. They had faced the storm, survived it, and emerged stronger. The future was still uncertain, but they would face it together, their bonds forged anew, ready for whatever lay ahead.